Hello, and welcome back to episode 13 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in Cities Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to begin the biggest single project that Veridian County has ever known, Lemuria International Airport. Construction of Lemuria International Airport will take extensive governmental subsidies because it's such a huge, transformative project. In fact, it's going to take so long to work on that I'm going to break it into two separate episodes in this series. So in this first part of our two-part fully custom airport construction, I want to focus on the core infrastructure of the airport to make it functional, terraforming the land around the airport, placing our runways and airports and making them functional, and building out our highway and rail connections to our terminals. It won't be pretty quite yet, but it'll be proof that we can in fact make a working custom airport in Cities Skylines 2. Before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we built an entirely new district in our city, building out our beautiful Nodo neighborhood and beginning to work on Uptown. This new development was spurred by the city of Lemuria's desperate need for improved medical care after the death waves of the Bridges and Ports DLC. Now the city has massive world-class hospitals with trauma centers, research institutions, and more that rival other major cities in the region like Seattle and Vancouver. Much like all of the precedent cities that we looked at, these hospitals are located on the highest hill near downtown. Building this district required us to conquer topography, and we did that last episode with bridges, quays, tunnels, hillside parking garages, and much more. Lastly, the district is filled with a bunch of residential uses, starting to help us rebuild our tax base and starting to provide the population to justify more commercial and office uses in our downtown. In today's episode, I want to begin by evaluating site constraints. There are a lot of different options for international airports all around the world, but there are a number of key constraints that are really going to drive the layout of our airport here in Cities Skylines 2. Most critically, the shape and the size of the islands that we've set aside for the airport, the lengths of the runways required for semi-realistic international service, and worst of all, the airport's built into the vanilla game. As you may remember from our very initial planning episode way back in episode 1, Veridian International Airport, or I'm going to call it Lemuria International Airport, is going to be located on this fairly sizable island that's kind of close to downtown. A lot of airports around the world are located a little bit further away from downtown for such a wide variety of reasons, but just because we are still at the end of the day trying to fit all of these services onto a map of this size, I want our airport to be a pretty defining feature of our city. And so it's going to be located pretty close to downtown on this island over here. At first glance, this island seems pretty sizable. It's about the size of the entirety of Nodo plus the Marina District plus the Central Business District. It's a pretty good size area, but the reality is that this is nowhere near big enough for an international airport like the one that we're going to be constructing in today's episode. The good news is this is not all flatlands, which means that we have a lot of land that we can push around to infill and create our own custom island in the area. The main challenge that we're going to face as we do that is maintaining these waterways around the perimeter, which I estimate means that we're probably going to need to get rid of these random little lumpies and bumpies and jut outs that we got going on here, and instead fill the island back to meet some of that need. Now, what's really going to drive the size of the airport island that we need in this game are two main things. First, the lengths of the runway. If I plop down the air transport modular service block, I can begin to see all of my different runway length options that StarQ has built for us. In this airport, we're going to be using the first 3 of these options because none of the other ones really make sense for a city of this size. The longest runway that we're going to have is 2,240 meters or 1.39 miles, which is about a scaled down version, maybe 2/3 of the length of a runway that we would want in the real world. And as you can already see, locating this is going to be quite a challenge on our islands that we got in here. I can't locate it close to the mainland because then we'll be cutting off our water supply, which means that if I want to maintain all of the water access around here, it's going to need to be located somewhere around here, all things considered, which will give us more than enough room on the left side of the runway for the waterway and enough room on the right side of the runway for the airport. We can't have just one runway. The second one is going to be just as long for crosswinds, and we're going to have to put that somewhere about here. Finally, I'm going to want a third runway at our airport, which is going to be used for local traffic only, and that'll parallel our main runway. And that shorter runway will be somewhere around here, just enough to complete that corner of the airport in there. These runways are going to be a pretty big determining factor in the size of our island, But the other thing is going to be the size of the airports that are built into the vanilla game, because I'm not going to be using custom assets for this airport, because unfortunately, I am a big fan of the Vanilla International Airport. It's really sad, but as an architect, this central terminal, plus that ground transportation hub off to the left of the screen right now, that green bubble, they are unfortunately absolutely gorgeous to me, and I really don't want to lose those in the construction of a custom airport. So we are going to use the Vanilla International Airport, and we're going to make it work. The problem is, a singular terminal like this is not big enough for an international airport. So in order to meet the demand that I'm expecting that we'll need, I think we're going to need a second terminal. But really, you can see that even this Vanilla International Airport, before we expand its runways and before we add that second terminal, is basically the size of this entire island. So we're going to have some pretty heavy terraining and topography to do here. The first step in doing that, of course, is to buy the tiles, which are already seemingly fairly well portioned for us. First things first, as we've done in many of the other districts around the city, is going to be deforesting the entire island and any of the regions that we're expecting to touch today. So I'm going to start by cleaning up the coastline that we're expecting to modify, followed by clearing every single bit of foliage from this beautiful island that we got over here. You know, this island could have been a tropical paradise, but nope, we are going to turn this into our airport because we love infrastructure in this city. Third project for me is going to be to figure out the average grade of the airport that we want to do. I think maybe up here around 310 yards, which seems to be where this largest swath of flatland is kind of sitting at. First step for me is actually, unfortunately, going to be to sever this boat connection that we got going on here. Don't worry, we will reestablish it. Now, setting our target to 310, let's begin to fill some of this land in. Oh man, just chopping a mountain in half for our own good. Now, I'm definitely hoping that we'll start to recreate some of the waterways around this area once we've got our assets placed down, but this is a little bit better of a start for us. Now, starting to think about general airport layout, as I mentioned, I want to get rid of the runways that are in the international airport right now and replace them with our own runways. And the proposed runway layout that we're looking at is something kind of like this. Now, the problem with this, as you can very initially see, is that we've got intersecting runways, which means that yes, one of them is for crosswinds and one of them is for main winds, and yes, we do have a secondary runway when we're in our primary wind direction, but it does mean that if the wind direction changes, we're going to have some operational challenges. So before we start to actually place down this airport too much, and before we start to build out the actual infrastructure that connects it all up, let's take a look at some precedent imagery. Now, as usual, I'm going to start off by taking a look at our airport here in Seattle. Our main airport here is Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, or SeaTac, or SEA, as they wish to be known. And SeaTac Airport is a pretty good argument for the idea of having just one terminal, where your entry point is coming off of a fairly minor highway, all things considered, and it branches off into your arrivals and your departures, roads, two levels stacked up and down, and then it just branches right back off. And that one little loop around there is where all of your functions are based off of for arrival, drop-off security, and all sorts of things like that. Of course, you've got branches off there for your parking and for your hotels on the other side of the highway and opposite side of the train station and all that. But your main road is just this one fairly small loop. And then, of course, you've got your north and your south concourses, which are connected up to the main terminal with an underground train. I think that sort of layout is generally something that we'll try and replicate in our international airport. SeaTac is one of the most constrained airports in the region, so you can kind of see how well they fit all these different uses into a generally pretty constrained site. Frankly, our airport is going to be also very constrained, but it's not going to handle the passenger volumes of SeaTac airports. But you can see that kind of adjacent to the taxiways, you get some of your industrial uses. You've got bioretention kind of sprinkled all around the facilities. You've got some pretty nice sized landing pads and a good amount of taxiways, but not an overwhelming amount. You've kind of got just one taxiway per runway. This one even seems shared between two runways, so it's really not an overwhelming amount. And once you get closer to your terminals, you end up getting just all this swath of concrete. You really don't get your greenery until you reach more of the taxiway and runway side of things. Either way, good little bit of inspiration for the city of Lemuria. The second city that we want to take a look at is one that's been featured many times in this series before, and we're going to be taking a look at Hong Kong, which actually has a pretty interesting airport history, all things considered. This right here is what used to be Kai Tak Airport. Famously known for its tough approach, planes would fly over all of these skyscrapers, making their way into the city until they got eyesight of Checkerboard Hill, at which point they would bank a hard right to make their way onto the Kai Tak runway, which was really short. This runway has since been decommissioned because it was hindering a ton of development in the area. It wasn't actually very safe, it was a pretty short runway, all things considered. And the airport has been replaced with a complete custom island way out on the new territories over here. You can see that they're actually constructing a second terminal and a whole nother runway on some more infill land over here, but the main airport is really this part over here, where you got your cargo services over here, you get your main terminal plus a couple of runways, major taxiways, and being an island, it's going to be a decent inspiration for us in terms of the island layout, not so much in terms of the overall airport, although this does somewhat resemble the international airport that comes with the base game. This fully custom infill island did begin to change the shipping patterns in the area, as well as highway infrastructure that just connects up all of these different facilities. As long as you've got your little drop-off area, you've also got an airport express connections directly from downtown into the airport, which is pretty neat. Somewhat similar to what we have in the city of Lemuria's airport. Pretty clean and pretty neat, and we're going to probably take a look at this in terms of filling in an island. The third city that we're going to look at, as always, is going to be the city of New York. New York has been featured a whole bunch of times on our channel, and I'm going to start with the airport that's going to have the least implications for our airport, and that's going to be JFK International Airport, which is kind of just a total mess. There's not a whole lot for us to take away here, besides that, once again, it's built on some pretty solid infill lands. It's even blocked off what could have been a shipping passage through here, just in favor of building out a whole runway. Pretty wild area JFK is. Second airport that we're also not going to take a lot of inspiration from is Newark Airport. It does have these intersecting runways over here where you got your two primary intersecting with your secondary crosswind runway. And it is kind of a mess at the intersection points, but it's not too bad, all things considered. But as you'll see in a lot of airports, there's your cargo uses, here are your terminals, your gates, a whole lot of concrete until you make your way to your actual taxiways and runways. And of course, you've got your flagship hotel right in the heart of it all at Newark Airport, because every airport's got to have a flagship hotel, and ours will too. The final airport in the New York area, and the one that we're going to take the most inspiration from, is LaGuardia Airport. It has also changed the shipping patterns in the area. You now are not going to ship anything in the Rikers Island Channel. You're going to go all the way around the East River into Flushing Bay if you ever needed to do that. LaGuardia Airport has some somewhat normally sized highway infrastructure network. It doesn't have a dedicated highway necessarily. It kind of just loops off of the Grand Central Parkway wherever it's most convenient for it. Plus, of course, you got your cargo areas, a whole bunch more parking, and the main thing that we're going to take inspiration from, which is the crossing runways. And if we just take a look at the way that this area is laid out, you've got your gates, which are very heavy in concrete, followed by a very narrow grassy barrier before you hit your actual taxiway. Then you've got your normal sized grassy barrier between your taxiway and your runway, and your taxiways all branch off in the direction that the planes would typically be moving. So if the plane is landing from this direction, then it might need to turn off of the runway at any of these individual points. Likewise, if a plane is trying to take off from the runway, it'll try and pull on right at the very end of the runway so that it can start to make its approach and take off. LaGuardia International Airport is an airport that we're probably going to revisit, or I'm going to revisit, as I take a look at how to fill out our intersection area and how to make it operate all smoothly and consistently. I took a look at tons and tons of different airports as I was trying to figure out what we wanted to do for Lemuria International Airport. And at the end of the day, I did settle on what we've gotten, and it's taken a lot of different tries. I think the airport layout that I'm going to build in today's episode is probably idea like 7 or 8, maybe idea 10 or something like that. And I've looked at a whole bunch more. I've looked at airports in Europe, airports in Asia, airports in Africa and Canada, but I think what I've settled on is a pretty good choice. So now that we generally understand the assets and the conditions that we're working with in-game and some of the realistic ways to handle how to create an airport using them, it's time to begin our initial airport planning. To work on our airport, we're first going to place down our core assets, namely the airports and the runways, and then we're going to terraform all around those runways and then delete them so that we can begin to establish our functionality. First step for me is actually going to be to delete this rail line that we have going on right here. Sorry, Airport Express. This line is going to temporarily be severed. Second, let's delete these roads that I created in the last few seconds, followed by severing our highway connection that we had previously built out through here. Now, with our blank slate, of course, we've got to place down our massive international airport. We might move it momentarily, but this should be a good start for us. Likewise, for our smaller airport, which is going to serve as our second terminal, this one has a little bit more flexibility in terms of where it's going to go. I'm going to start by placing this down somewhere around here. Now, I'm actually going to go through these assets and remove all of these existing runways and taxiways, just leaving the gate, because we're going to need to redraw all of those manually anyway. Next up for us, I want to figure out a nice place to locate this air transport block, like perhaps right out here. We'll see if I continue to remember that location or if it's just going to be lost to the sands of time. Now it's time for the ever important step of placing down our runway. Now there's not really a science to this. I'm kind of just eyeballing it. I'm getting the sense that something like this feels generally feasible. What is it complaining about? No car access? I haven't seen that in my testing. Let's just, for the sakes of testing it, let's see what happens if I draw out some taxiways in the area. Am I able to create a line? Yes, that looks like it's routing just fine. And hey, check that out. We can indeed create air transport lines using these custom runways. Very nice, despite it claiming that there's no car access. Okay, whatever I did just made the problem worse, but I'm sure it's fine. Let's move on. Moving on to the second runway in this area. It's got to be parallel to the first one, which means we're looking at a runway perhaps like this. And the final runway is going to be in the total opposite direction. And if I can do something like this, then we should be golden. Good morning, I slept on things. I also relaunched the game with the updated static ploppable packs from StarQ. The only issue that I have been able to spot is here at our convention center, and this extension wing seems to have bumped out off to the side a little bit. So let's just nice and simply scoot this right back into place. The other major issue, as you're able to see in the background, is unfortunately our Vegas sphere, or our Stockholm globe as it's been dubbed, seems to have fallen apart a little bit because the Shard Arena static ploppable that's been located underneath it updated, and when any changes are made to anything around these props, they just start to disappear. So unfortunately, Shard Arena seems to have broken, and I don't think that we're going to replace it right now, unfortunately. Way back when I first built this, Harbormaster J showed me a pretty cool alternative to it. So unfortunately, I think we may be starting completely from scratch in the Stadium District moving forward, and creating a new version of the sphere whenever we do get to this big project. And I don't think there's any reason for me to leave this semi-demolished sphere up here. And we've got ourselves a bit of a train blockage over here. We have a train sitting in the cargo depot that's just loading for loading and loading. And then this train is waiting to pull into that same one, which is blocking this train from pulling into the second depot. And this train pulling into the second depot is blocking all of the other track. So as soon as this train pulls out and allows the second train to pull in, oh, we might actually have it get unblocked. But this train needs to finish its loading journey first. Uh-oh. Another train pulls in, adds to the blockage. Oh, there it goes. Watch, once it pulls out, all these trains are going to start moving and everything is going to become slowly unblocked. This one might get priority and block the tracks yet again until it pulls back in. But here, this train starts to pull in, and once that pulls in, second train starts to pull in, unblocks the rear set of track, and now the rear set of tracks can clean up, second set of tracks can clear up. Gosh, what a mess. And we're all cleared up. Look at that. This train network is fairly efficient unless there come to be multiple cargo trains trying to get into the same terminal. That's when we run into problems, but for the most part, pretty well off. Anyway, back to our airport project. Okay, so you'll actually notice that I have taken a step backwards. It's a little bit unfortunate, but I've been trying to just get the functionality to work, and these runways really don't like to be intersecting. We're actually going to delete this runway. And if we take a look at our invisible net lanes, you can see that we actually have 2 main functional runways. Now we've got that 3rd runway outlined. I'm actually going to fill it in just for fun, just for layout. Next step for us is going to be to add in our waterways all around here and tighten up the terraforming along with that. And let's add in our subway station, including double checking our subway plan and map that we created earlier on. Let's start with that, actually. All right, let's just take a look at this vision map that we created way back in episode 1. Taking a look at our subway map, it looks like we've got 3 subway lines that are intersecting on the airport island. We've got the blue, the purple, and the orange lines. We've got 2 lines coming in from the north, 1 that's going to come in from the east, 1 from the south, and 2 that are going to head out to the west. That means that to me, we're going to have at least a 2-platform station, with the purple line probably doing some somewhat interesting routing since it's going to want to come into the center to make its way up to the north with the blue and not intersect with the orange all too much, but so that the blue and orange can also rejoin. So we're going to have some somewhat interesting subway routing over here, but it's going to be good. I'm excited for that. Of course, we also have our commuter rail line, our Airport Express, but that terminal is built into the airport station. So all we've got to add is a 2-platform subway station. And while we're in this mapping document, just so that we don't have to revisit it later in the episode, let's just double check our highway map. Our highway map is going to have I-192 branching off from the crazy intersection near downtown and making its way towards the National Mall Island over here, plus I-392 making its way from this cloverleaf that we built out a few episodes ago to intersect right at the airport. We're going to have some interesting routing that we got going on here and some interchange that we'll have to build in the next segment. But for now, of course, we're still in the initial section. We're still just getting our core airport elements down. So let's just place down this subway platform back in City Skylines 2. And I think in order to place down this elevated asset that we want to place, we're going to have to break Broad Street over here because I don't think that this is really the cross connection that we want to have. Just thinking more broadly about how I want to locate this. Almost wonder if we do something just like this, maybe, where it still has its roadway access. It's still somewhat aligned, but it comes just off to the side of where our heavy rail line is going to be situated. And you can see that diagonal boundary doesn't overlap and the shadow doesn't overlap with our beautiful ground transportation center that we have here. I think that works out. And what I just did, now that that's placed down, is just start to draw out the different roads all around here. Even creating a couple key walls so that our train, as it comes in, can kind of sink down into the ground and make its way around some of the roadway connections that I'm expecting we'll have here. I think if I lower the train track, since it's already going to be coming in at kind of a lower elevation, we can keep things a little bit more stable without interfering with our eventual roadway networks. One of the cool things that I realized while I was playing around with this is I noticed that we can actually pretty clearly see our height restriction for our planes in here. I know we're going to have to raise up our highway connections quite a bit in here to be able to get some ships underneath there, but we actually don't need to come down nearly as much as I expected. You can see that even this existing building is totally fine for the runway over there. We can go up a little bit higher than I thought we would be able to with these runways. Now, I don't think we want to. I think we do want to maintain some pretty nice ground clearance just to avoid any unintentional accidents happening, but this does provide me a little bit more flexibility on height than I expected, so what a good thing. I'll take it. Next up, as I said, we've got to tighten up some of our terraforming around the island, and I think we want to do that by starting with our water service. Let's create a narrow seaway that runs all the way around this island. And I think I will be getting rid of these couple of island bits, so I can pretty easily get rid of these, maybe cut in a little bit on that coastline before staking my way up and around this fairly tight corner. And then I believe we should be able to just cut this right around the bend over there. Likewise, I think I want to take a narrow seaway just around this island. So let's bring that out here, hopefully without too many deviations. And both of these connect into the existing seaway network quite nicely. Love to see it. Now let's take a fairly decently deep seaway height and let's begin to straighten out this coastline. We're playing God over here, but that's just what airports do. I think my game is unpaused, so the water should just begin to slowly fill in. Oh yeah, we're totally gonna get a little bit of flooding in here, but that's okay by me. It seems like with these modifications to the terrain, we're cutting our seaways just fine. A little bit tight, but it's completely workable. We managed to terrain in a way that does not impede on the main taxiway very much. We're not going to be using this outside taxiway, so I could probably even pull it back a little bit. If I drew in some key walls, maybe it would let me do that. No, it's not going to let me do that. That's fine. But this does make me wonder, though, just seeing this big old slide down, is if our airport is actually too high up. I know that we picked a nice height earlier on. Feels like things are just a little bit too high, maybe twice as high as they really reasonably need to be. Just doing some research into the way that things are typically laid out, a lot of airports around the world are laid out at closer to 20 feet above sea level in a more realistic use case. And our airport, if we go looking kind of around the perimeter, if our sea level is at minus 36 feet or so, but our actual airport is at like 12 feet, that's a pretty substantial amount up. So in reality, I think what we need to do is be kind of located around maybe minus 15 feet, which is going to put us somewhere around here, a little bit closer to the water. I think it feels a little bit more realistic than that, which is like 40 feet up is just a little bit crazy. So what I'm going to do, and this may be game breaking, so I am going to save my game before I do this. I'm going to use the beautiful power of move it, basically this whole area, and let's see what happens if I control H it to the height of that road that we just created. This might go terribly. Our runways still seem like they're pretty good. And besides a little bit of jank that we had right around here, I just deleted the roads for now and I'll have to redraw them in. Everything honestly seems pretty reasonable. So I'd say that was a pretty good move. And now that we have the core assets for our airport placed down, we need to begin work on the island's infrastructure connections. This island is connected to the mainland by multiple subway lines, as we reviewed earlier, a high-speed rail line, the Airport Express, and 2 highways, one of which terminates on the island, and the other of which is going to run through it. This means that we've got a lot of fairly complex routing and bridging over these waterways to do, particularly if we want to maintain some barge service around the island. Just adding to the complications on here, we also have these express lanes located on I-92, and these express lanes are intended as a direct connection into and out of the airport. It'd be a pretty cool connection that we've got going on for ourselves, but what that does for us is it creates some pretty complex infrastructure, because basically what we're going to need to do is split this highway into effectively 4 separate highways. You've got your one highway that continues straight through the island, your second highway that combines the express lanes and your exit from this one into your connections to the airport, and of course your 2 in the opposite direction, one that continues straight through and one that connects up to the express lanes and your entrance on this one. So we got 4 highways coming in on this front, which is going to be pretty cool in and of itself, and you're going to have a couple of junctions and crossovers and all that in here. Then this one, which I believe is I-392, is going to have to intersect with all that and make sure that it has connections into the same inbound and outbound points. So it's going to be a pretty complex connection. What I think we want to start by doing is drawing in our departures lane. Arrivals is typically going to be on the bottom, so departures we're probably going to want to weave in, maybe we can weave that in right about here. Obviously we have to figure out some of the supports, and this is a little bit low, but it's not absurdly low. I think all of our vehicles could still feasibly drive through here. Even our tallest delivery van can fit underneath these. No double-decker buses on the lower level, I suppose, and on the upper level they seem pretty fine as well. You know what? I like this. I like this location for our departures drive, so we can just literally run it straight across. Maybe it branches out to the side ever so slightly as it comes over here. Problem is that all of this is going to have to weave around our subway line, because our subway lines are even tighter on the grade. We really don't want to change the grade all too much in here. So maybe this is actually what we start with, believe it or not. So we have 3 main subway connections that we're going to want to have. This purple line, M4, is going to want to come all the way around through Airlim and then parallel this highway. Maybe it comes over to the left side of the highway so that it can make a more gradual curve into the subway tracks. And then it's going to want to follow the center tracks so that it can make its way up to the north over here. Let's see where we want this northern connection to be located. We're going to want our north branch coming in over there. I bet we can have our west branch kind of follow the highway coming out of this side. So that really shouldn't be all too complicated for us. I'm just going to pencil in something kind of like that. Our east connection is going to have some pretty interesting routing, all things considered, because it needs to go over this interchange over here, which means that it needs to make a pretty tight curve from this existing station. Let's have it do that right into the median over here, extend its way right up with a clean 4% slope. And that gets us way more than enough clearance over that first highway interchange, and just enough over the second one. Now, the cool thing about this elevated subway station is that it doesn't have restrictions on which directions the tracks have to go. One side can be both going in the westbound direction, and one side can be both going in the eastbound direction. So what that means is that we can actually draw in our connection from the orange line to use the center platforms, and have our blue and purple lines use the outside platform. Really, this is the junction that we need, a triple splitter thing. So all I need to do is just use move it to kind of clean this up a little bit. The goal basically being to straighten out these 2 outer track edges so it really feels a little bit more cohesive. And honestly, that looks pretty neat. I gotta say. And oh my goodness, check that out. That's a pretty awesome subway interchange over there. And then on this other side, we can do something somewhat similar, except we don't necessarily need these full interchanges to allow the center tracks to merge. The other side can be fully separated on that front. And I'm gonna get to that, but for whatever reason, I decided, hey, why don't I just start to raise up our highway over here? So I'm just gonna do it. I'd say that's pretty good. Pretty good. If I scoot any of these props underneath our bridge over here, seems like we've actually got the right height clearance, which is pretty great. So I just have to iron out a few of the kinks in here. The other element of this, that in order to bridge our grade, I'm not gonna be able to raise our Airport Express all the way up to the height of this highway. So instead, we're gonna need to install ourselves a lift bridge. And there are some, of course, pretty neat bridge options that we got with Bridges and Ports DLC. So let's get one of those installed right around here in a way that comes pretty close but doesn't fully clip with our subway line. In order to do that, let's just really quickly kinda Look at that. Tight. Nice and tight right up against the subway bridge. That looks pretty cool. We might make some adjustments to that in the future, but hey, for now, I'm quite a fan of that. And oh my goodness, I really need to be going to bed, but I just can't help myself. Alright, fine. I'll go to bed now. I did way too much there. I drew out our subway lines to connect up on both sides. I raised up these bridges. I drew out these bridges. I added a cross arch bridge to the subway area. I lowered the heights of the subway track going over a crazy intersection so it feels a little bit more fitting in overall. And things are starting to come together just a little bit. But of course, once I wake up and go to work and finish work and then come back home and then do all my adulting stuff and again finally get back to gaming, then I can actually start to draw out these highway connections once again to start to create our ins and outs for our airport. Very exciting. I suppose then I'll have to be back with you shortly. Alright, I'm back after a long day of work. I apologize if you can hear the dishwasher running in the background. I made a mistake. I turned it on before recording and now I'm too scared to turn it back off. But we're back working on infrastructure connections, and today I want to connect up our highway lines. As you remember, this highway line, I-192, needs to continue all the way from here past the airport, intersecting with this whole airport junction, of course, then underneath this runway into a tunnel before it surfaces over here on the National Mall Island, or Lemuria Gardens as I seem to have called it. And I-392 needs to end somewhere right around here. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge with all of the infrastructure that we already have around here, but it shouldn't be all too bad, all things considered. We have got quite a bit of room, and while I would love to use some of that room for parking and all that, that's going to be a secondary use to the highways that we draw through the area. Typically, when we start to work on a highway interchange, there's a couple of strategies that we can go with. Firstly, we can take our inputs and our outputs and our planned routes and we can kind of start to draw them out in a sketching program. I can draw some red and green and colorful lines just to kind of represent all the directions that all the connections are going to need to go. The second method, which I think is what we're going to do here today, is the just do it method. In other words, just start placing some roads down and hope it all works out. I don't really have a good way of planning all this out. I don't have a huge amount of ideas. It's kind of flexible in that sense, given the amount of room that we have. So I think what I'm going to do is, just do it. I'm going to start placing down some roads and we'll tweak them later on as necessary. A little bit of time-lapse time. Hello? Are you lost, sir? Are you lost? Where are you trying to go? What's happening right now? I don't think you know where you're going. You're not going very far. You're kind of, at best, you're gonna do a loop, but I haven't connected this up yet. Are you just on a little adventure, or yeah, having fun? Okay. Thought maybe I would bring you in at least now, because I've made quite a bit of progress since we last talked. Just ignore all these little no car access signs. They're irrelevant. It'll get fixed eventually. But you can see we've had our express lanes plus our two main highways. And what I've got over here is the junction, or the switch point. The switch point is when these two main highways merge up with the express lane, kind of at this point, and this is where part of our airport access is. Let's pretend that we're someone coming from downtown heading into the airport. We could either have taken the express lanes or we could take the normal highway, but either way, we could take the normal highway through and head up onto the departures lane, just taking this little slip lane over here around. Or alternatively, we could come in through this little 4-lane segment and do some lane switching to go up to the departures section, though we really wouldn't recommend that. We'd have the GPS would much rather take the slip lane over here. Once you're on arrivals level, there is another slip lane to bring you back up to the departures level, but they both meet the terminal over here. For this little segment, you have your departures and arrivals on both levels. Then here the departures swerve back down just to meet up with the arrivals on this side of the road, because that's just the way that the asset worked. I would have much rather have the departure come down on the outside face still without needing this weird crossing movement, but just the way the asset was, there were a few extra lanes in here, so I guess that's what I gotta use this for. Anyway, once you get into this segment of road over here, you have your option of continuing around the loop or heading up and around. If you head up, then you're back on the main highway, and that'll eventually go underneath this runway. You could also loop around, and that'll take you onto I-392 pretty soon. Alternatively, you could stick on the loop, and the loop will take you right back around to the arrival section, which is why there's the slip lane up to departures, because this loop doesn't take you up to departures any other way. If you branch off in the opposite direction, it'll take you down, around, again through this whole mess of things, and this looks tight, I know, but check out the streetlights. Actually, you can't check out the streetlights because the streetlights are gone. But if there was a streetlight here, it would actually be completely fine height-wise going underneath that. So trust me, it works. Anyway, you get out of this branch, you head up, up, up through all of this mess, and now you're on this 3-lane segment, which can take you either back onto the main highway or onto the express lanes to head downtown. Either way, we've kind of got our core airport connections all established now. This is leaving us with a little bit of area in here, and that's great because we do have these local roads down here that are supporting our subway station, our air transport block, and serving as the base points for this international airport. So we're kind of creating a little bit of a local road network down here underneath all of these highways. I think we might even be able to loop this slip lane around in some way to connect it up to this local road network, maybe even something over here. Just kind of creating this interior section. Maybe we'll branch off in here as well, and all centered around the two halves of the train track. So maybe it'll be 2 halves of the train road or something like that. Maybe we have a little bridge over it. Not entirely sure yet. But what this means is that we could either have a hotel or a parking garage or maybe both in here. There's a fairly decent amount of room to squeeze in a whole ton of parking in here, or a hotel or anything that we really feel like putting in there. So I'm pretty happy with how that's laid out. It's kind of similar to Newark, if you remember that precedent imagery. The hotel and parking for Newark is kind of in the middle of the big old highway loop, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's get on with building our connections into I-392. Oh yeah, check that out. We got our connections running into I-392, and yes, you can see that this highway does kind of curve a little bit strangely, but that was because, one, these 3 connection points that I pointed out in the previous segment were kind of right around here instead of right around here, and 2, because we want to build stuff in here. So I wanted to keep it free of any highways running straight overhead. Instead, this kind of runs overhead the already existing train line, which is already a non-buildable area. It still has enough vertical clearance for us to build a little bridge over the train line down here, so I think we're pretty good on all those fronts. We have a nice tight branch off point, but it does, ooh, I need to clean that up as well. There we go, a little bit better as you're coming in from downtown. Oh, Nope, not happy. Folks, do you see why it takes me so long to build anything in this dang series? I can't keep tweaking it until it's perfect, but in reality, from above, it looks just fine. You can't even see it because of the shadows. As you're coming in from downtown, you do have this tight little ramp that's squeezed in here. We've got pillars that I'll need to clean up as the segments go on, but this ramp does curve around and make its way into I-392 southbound, so all that works just fine. It's a little bit tight, but hey, it works just fine. Also, our subway tracks, I forgot to actually draw out our last two coming out of here. So what it has to do is they meet up, and they meet up pretty tightly around my traffic lights that seem to have disappeared. There we go, my traffic lights are around here. And if I raised, I'm pointing to my screen like you can see it. If I raise the subway line right here up any higher, it would expose the traffic lights on the bottom. So I was able to use that kind of as my general clearance for the area. If the traffic light bottom can be up there, it means that all the trucks and all can pass through underneath it. So too can my subway track be at the bottom. And you can see the traffic lights also have these side ones. So we're just fine on the signaling front. The subway track then comes down, makes its way underneath this big old loop. And yes, this loop does need to be this big because it needs to go all the way from ground level up like 3 layers or 4 layers of highways. It's a pretty big old loop to make it up all over this. It does even poke into the airport a little bit, but that's fine. We can detail that. The subway train has to do a little deviation to come underneath this ramp, and it curves back around these cargo buildings and makes its way up to the bank that we had drawn out earlier. Loving how this is looking, to be honest. The last step for us in this extremely long infrastructure connection section is to finish drawing out these highways into a tunnel coming underneath this little shipping channel and making its way up into Lemuria Gardens. I think we'll do kind of an unceremonious mega intersection here into I-133. I don't think we'll do anything too fancy, and our subway track will create the tunnel, but we won't really do anything too fancy with that either. But let's at least create them so we have the placeholders in once we get around to developing Lemuria Gardens. And there we go, those connections are drawn in, and I am so glad that I didn't decide to bring it up and turn it into a bridge of any sorts, because that is some complex geography we got down there. Let's see if I can turn on underground mode. Our subway line is a little bit worse for wear, but we'll do a little bit of polish on that. Actually, let's polish it right now. There we go, much cleaner. We've got ourselves a couple of curvy little tunnels that head straight underneath the channel, through the underneath of this mountain, and then, oh, I forgot to draw our subway resurfacing, and then resurface at the other end of the mountain, coming up here onto the surface. I originally had these drawn, you saw in the time lapse, I originally had these drawn to have the tunnel entrances right up against this runway, but I forgot that we actually have this taxiway over here to account for. So I had to reconfigure the tunnels slightly just to move the tunnel entrances back. And it's, as always, just a total pain to work with tunnel entrances in this game, but I think I got it to work and I'm pretty happy with how this lays out, especially once we get to detailing it next episode. I think this looks just fine for us. And with these rail lines and highways built, we can finally move into the final phase for today. That's establishing functionality. I'm not going to complete this fully in the sense of bringing life to the airport with like static ploppables and vehicles driving around the airport, but at least for today, I want to make sure that we fix our rail line that's currently broken, extend our subway lines out to here, and create the air transportation lines that are the whole point of today's video. Let's begin with the easiest of all of them, just redirecting our airport express line and bringing this back into service. This is very exciting to me, as this is A big part of the reason why I even chose to use the Vanilla International Airport asset was the fact that it has this beautiful ground transportation center. So let's get it in. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about drawing this in is just making me realize it's a long-standing question I had. Does it matter which side this is drawn into? Okay, just a little bit of quick research, and it's actually better to align this to the departure side because a train leaving the station needs to be able to accelerate as quickly as possible to get back up to high speed. It doesn't make sense to prioritize arrival because the train is already going to be slowing down as it takes this final curve into the station. But if you prioritize departure, it can start to accelerate a little bit here, and it's not going to reach full speed by the time it gets to the curve. So it can take this curve closer to the speed limit and just maintain a smooth acceleration all the way out of the station. In reality, as I mentioned, the trains would probably use alternating platforms just because of load management or any sort of potential for delays and buildups outside of the station on the approach. But within the game, since it only allows us to pick one, let's have it aligned to the departure track. The next step I'm really tracking is drawing out our subway lines. If we once again take a look at the Lemuria City rail map that we created in the first episode, you can see that our airport has 3 lines that are going to be running through it, and we did plan for all of these. Our orange line, which currently runs right past Western Heights, is going to come into the station and then continue out to the west and make its way into Lemuria Gardens, as we're calling it now. Which means I probably want to make sure we have this left turning movement built into the station exit out of the tunnel, and at least place down a preliminary terminus station for it here at the tail ends of the National Mall, just so that we get a little bit of a understanding of travel times within the area. This blue line is not going to be serving our downtown, it's serving areas that we haven't even started to build yet, so I'm not going to bother actually drawing this out quite yet. I think that line can remain undrawn out for the time being. And finally, the purple line. This one's a little bit of a hard one for me because it does actually circle back to start to serve the medical campus that we built last episode and the civic center that we might tackle after this airport project. So I think it might actually be worth us drawing this out, but in order to get there, it does circle past the Rebridge golf course and these beach towns that we haven't even started to think about how we want to design yet. So it's going to be traveling through some pretty deadhead area, and I think the way I'll handle that is just not by building stations in the area. Just make sure the track is laid out, and those will effectively be infill stations once the areas around them are started to be developed. But at least for now, I think it'll be worth our time to draw our line out towards that civic center that we'll develop in a future episode. Alright, here in game, let's begin with the orange line. Currently we have our subway tunnel coming out on this side of the highways, and it turns right a little bit. I think what we also want to do is have one branch that continues to step up and make its way over the highway before turning left and snaking its way down closer to the tip of this island. As it turns out, this is not going to be an easy feat because actually getting even up to ground level over here is our maximum slope. So instead, I think our solution is actually going to be to lower all of these highway segments around here to roughly the same height as the tunnel entrance. Just like that. Oof, what a mess. Rather than building out a whole system of retaining walls around here, it may just have been easier to grade out this area ever so slightly, because it's not, as you can see, too huge of a project with too huge of impact to the surrounding area. Anyway, this will absolutely make our train connection a whole lot easier to manage, and I've sloped it up just out of that area with a totally reasonable grade and some slightly subpar visuals as always. Thank you, Cities Skylines 2, for that. And now we can continue to drag this out to a terminal station, which I think we can put like right here in the curve of the highway. There we go, beautifully connected up. Now what we can do around here is use our small little service alley. We can build out of this road on a little stub and curve it ever so slightly right into the heart of our station area. And now we can draw our subway line all the way out to here. So this is an exciting moment. This is going to be for our orange line, which is the line that's currently running through Western Heights and stopping at Crescent City. Let's just drag this endpoint all the way out. And just as we discussed earlier in the episode, it should be on the departure side of the platform. So we'll draw it out to there. And now we've got our 2 orange lines snaking their way all the way through here. It wants to be on the outer platforms, which is exactly as we've intended. So we can put these into their designated spots, and it'll follow the curve of the track all the way back into Crescent City Station. Drag those out just fine. And now we've got ourselves a pretty nice looking functional metro stop. Next up for us is going to be to draw out our purple line, which is also going to be a fairly substantial extension, running all the way up north and around and looping back around to the Civic Center over here. Now, I'm not entirely sure what our Civic Center station design is going to look like, particularly because the M2 line that's going to make its way all the way up to the university is intended to branch off towards the golf course and kind of follow this coastline. So I'm not entirely sure how we want to handle this long term, but at least in the short term, I'm just going to place down a singular elevated station, shift this tower back ever so slightly and draw out a road underneath to serve it. And before we even extend our purple line, I'm first going to extend this light blue line, the M2 line, here to the Civic Center, to the People's Campus, rather. Rebuild our Nodo station connections, and I'll rename all the stops on this line as well. Now, to connect the purple line all the way up to this station, we have a dilemma where we could dig the subway tunnel down and turn it into a tunnel before re-elevating it all through this area, or we could do what I think I'm leaning towards, which is just building a lift bridge right after this runway. Now, I'm going to place this down, not necessarily expecting it to work, but I'm going to look at our arrival clearance, and yet that definitely 100% does not work. I guess we're tunneling, y'all. Can't say I didn't try. Oh yeah, so much nicer. Now we're gonna have to deep bore underneath this hill before we resurface on the opposite side of these tracks. And there we go, connection is now drawn in. The line comes along the whole beach area, it makes its way right over the highway with plenty of clearance before hitting the hillside, becoming at grade for a brief moment before ducking down underground to go underneath our heavy rail, high-speed rail tracks, at which point it heads underneath those, deep bores through the mountain, deep bores underneath the canal, and then comes back up, making its way to cut and cover around the airport, cut and fill retaining walls as you make your way up, and then you're at grade somewhere around here, where my cursor is right now, and then you remain at grade for the rest of the portion until you make your way towards this intersection and closer to the airport station. Now we've got the terminus, the final terminus for our giant purple line drawn out, so let's adjust that route, which I'm noticing I actually drew it incorrectly. I'm seeing the colors now. I'm noticing that my purple route actually serves Western Height. The green route that I originally drew this out to is actually the Stadium District route, which is going to curve all the way down here. So I actually connected this up to the wrong part. Wild. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe I'll actually leave this connection in because I did put some time and some thought into doing it. I'm going to say that this connection is made because I expect that we might have a rail depot, so it just creates a little bit better of a flow to and from our forthcoming subway depot. We might even have the ability to have another station somewhere in here, so let's draw our train line out to possibly accommodate for something like that. There we go, much better. What this does is it elevates, it follows the curve of the hill, it remains at grade kind of along the inner side of the hill, then it elevates over the valley, meets the hill once again, then it hits the rail line that we'd drawn out previously, making its way over the highway. It has a little bit of a junction, which is going to be great if we're basing this off of a rail depot location. And then of course it makes its way to the airport. Now, let's actually extend our line this time around, and this time, this is going to be a really big move and it might not even work, but I'm going to try it. If I drag this line all the way out to here, does it follow along the route that we want it to? It looks like it will. Excellent, 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 excellent. That's following the right routing. Then it's a little bit wrong on these tracks, so let's move it into the right locations. The purple line is going to use the center platforms, rather the M4 line will use these center platforms, and that looks just like that. Now, in order to serve all these subway lines, we are absolutely going to need a new subway depot. So let's figure out just how many trains we're missing right now. Which puts us at a requirement of 16 vehicles for our current train track. And all of that is currently being served by this single subway yard, which has a capacity of 10. So I think what we want to do is add in this extra tracks upgrade that we had planned for since the beginning. You can see it's already connecting to subway lines on one side, so we'll just have to connect it on the opposite side. This will bring our capacity up to 15. And that goes a long way towards addressing our capacity requirement of 16 trains, but I do think we still want to add at least one more depot. So I think what we'll do is we'll add the terminal subway yard, and I think what I want to do is kind of draw that out around this elevation on a flat pad up on the hillside. So let's remove some of the trees around here. Let's find the elevation of this track. That's 91 feet. And so we're looking at somewhere right around here for this depot. And it seems like this fits in with plenty of room to spare. And that's a pretty cool little track interchange we got for ourselves right over there. I like it. Let's connect it up to a road. We're going to be drawing this out right up to the same little street that we got down here for the tram depot. And there we go. Now we do have our essential connections drawn up to the subway yard. I do think this road might actually be a little bit excessive. I think my game's going to crash now. I hit delete in the UI and it didn't delete. So now the game doesn't know if it's actually deleted or not. I'm going to delete it for real and it's going to crash. Watch. Aha. Okay, I'm back after quite a few minutes of everything loading up. Pro tip, don't use this trash button. It doesn't work on roads. It doesn't. Use the bulldozer. Now that we have our subway lines and our high-speed rail line drawn out, it's time to establish the functionality of the airport itself. I know, we spent quite a while working on just the surroundings of the airport, and it's not even detailed or looking pretty at all, but we did spend quite a while working on that. Now we gotta actually make the airport itself functional. And the first step for me personally is going to be to connect up Lemuria International Airport. Let's call that the north satellite. So I want to connect up from our main terminal and the entry point over here to the satellite. The way that I want to do that is with an underground people mover. So that's going to be using just a little tram. We want to do this with public transport lanes. So this is the type of road that we're going to use to provide our connection to our north satellite. What I want to do is draw our tram and bus road out from here, and I'll just draw a little stub two-way tram line right out to the end there, and that'll provide us our crossover for our forthcoming line. This is where our station is going to be located, so let's get some pedestrian connections drawn in over here. And all of this is eventually going to be covered up. I don't want any of this to be visible. I want all the way from Brookhaven Lane all the way down here to all be looking like one larger building. So that's why I'm not too worried about this parking being visible over here. And this is the totally janky way that we'll be handling our connection to the underground there. Again, all of this is going to be covered up, so it's just fine. And while we're here, let's place down our tram stop right in the middle there, and connected right up to all of these platforms. Love it. Now we're gonna want to do the same thing on the other side. Oh, it's not gonna let me place this in. What if I zoom in really hard? Here, if we go into photo mode to make sure, we can see that we do actually have our road as we intend it to be. There it is. We got the angle just right. There we go. Now let's make sure that all of our roads are upgraded with our tram connections. And let's pop into photo mode to head inside of our airport building, which again, I don't think I had it in here earlier in the episode, but this room right here, this is why I love this airport asset so much. It's gorgeous. I love this. I love standing in here. This is my airport. It's amazing. But down below that room is where we have our, there it is. So now we've got our pathway for our people mover. While I'm down here, we're gonna need to actually add our little tram depot that allows for this. So it's just a super small 3x5 tram depot that connects straight up to the road and will provide us our trams that we need. And of course, with our 2 stations drawn in, we can create the Lemuria International Airport automated people mover. And you can see it turns around just as it should. Let's make sure it's named Automated People Mover, Lemuria International Airport. Kind of fun. So now, both of these have all of their power and services ready. All we need to start to do is connect up the stations to the runways in daytime. Oop, sorry, flashbang you with the daylight. Now, when we're laying out our taxiways that take us from each of these gates, which currently say no car access, to the runways, which have their own taxiways, as I've been showing throughout the episode, we're going to really want to consider where those taxiway locations are. One of the taxiway locations is pretty obvious to me. It's going to be located kind of right where the international airport has one by default, and that's going to service the gates at this north satellite, as well as just serve a general connection to all the gates at this area. We're also going to need at least one taxiway for all of the cargo and passenger gates within these south areas of the airport. And I do think, kind of as the airport has right now, we can make these connections in. Hey, that looks pretty good to me. That looks pretty nice. Yeah, that totally worked. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say that worked. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I outlined all of those things. And that's because eventually we're going to need to, in the next episode, start to fill out the airport with some very different uses. So I want to make sure that we actually know where our definable boundaries are. For example, now that I have these lines drawn out and I actually know where our individual taxiways are, I can actually outline all of this and say, hey, this is some great dead space on our project that we can reuse, and that we should reuse for a better control tower. But either way, we now actually should have the runways in for all of our gates except for this one. This one on Terminal 2 is kind of giving me a headache, or the north satellite is kind of giving me a headache. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just delete this gate in particular. Maybe that's fine. Oh, that did something. That did do something. I don't know what. Oh, it made the gate functional. The gate's functional. That's nice. Now there's just this random no car access block for whatever reason. Whatever. It seems like we're doing a little bit better. Now the last step for us, as we've established our functionality, now that we have our actual taxiways drawn out, is going to be to actually create our routes. And oh boy, this is the exciting part. This is the exciting part. In order to understand the routes that we want to create from our airport, we have to understand what our outside connections are. So let's look to the skies and check them out. To the north of us, we've got one connection, and this is going to be basically our connections to Canada and to Russia. To the west, we've got two connections. To the northwest, I'll call that our connection to the North Pacific, and to the southwest, I'll call that our connection to the South Pacific. To the south, we've only got one air connection, and I'll call that our connection to the west coast and the southwest coasts of the United States. And to the east, we're back at two connections. I'll call the southeast one for the USA East and Atlantic coasts, with the northeast connection, Northeast USA, Canada, and Europe. In Cities Skylines 2, we have two types of airplanes, where the passenger airplane is actually basically the same model as the airliner. And what I'm thinking is that we'll use the passenger airplane and the airliner for our international and our further away domestic flights. And then we'll use the regional jet for more of our local or closer flights. If we're going to the North Pacific, we'll use a full-size airliner. If we're just going to California, we'll use a regional jet. Now let's look at how many gates we have on this project. Right now we have 6 cargo gates, which is perfect because we have 6 cargo connections. We also have 23 passenger connections, which is a good amount. It basically means 4 connections for each of these destinations, I think we want to designate one of these wings or two of these wings as our international wings and everything else as domestic. So my current strategy, I think, is going to be the north satellite is international, and this top part of the airport, the central terminal, is international. Maybe it's just 4 gates, but I think it's going to be all 6 of these. Then the other collections of 6 gates are going to be regional. The first 6 are going to be our high capacity regional, and then the second 6 are going to be our low capacity regional. I think we might also do these 3 as low capacity international flights as well. So those might be our flights to Canada. The reason we want to have our smaller planes on this side is because it's closer to the smaller runway, while all the bigger international flights will be closer to the larger runway or closer to the central taxiway. Why don't we just get going? Why don't we do it? Let's start with our cargo. That's going to be the easiest of all. I'm going to start at the north for each one of these. Cargo to Canada, cargo to the North Pacific, cargo to the South Pacific, cargo to the West Coast and the Southwest coasts of the US, cargo to the Atlantic coast, and cargo to Northeast USA. Next, let's begin with our international flight. Let's start with our North Pacific flight. Let's say we have 11 international flights. 3 of those flights are going to be more local flights. Let's say that one of them is going to go to Northeast Canada. One of them might go more to Central Canada, as well as to West Coast Canada. And those are our little regional international flights. Now let's create a couple of routes going towards kind of Russia area, anywhere that would fly over the Russia path rather. Now let's have 3 lines that run to the North Pacific, as well as our final 3 international lines that run to the South Pacific. Now we're moving on to our domestic route. We've got 12 slots available for 3 more sections. I think we're going to do four of these smaller local jets heading to the southwest, as well as to the remainder of the west coast. Let's do 1 regional small jet to the Atlantic coast and 1 regional small jet to the northeast. Plus, let's do 3 large jets to the Atlantic coast, as well as 3 large jets to the northeast. Excellent. And now we have all of our routes in. Look at all those connections. That's pretty awesome, I gotta say. Now I'm gonna need to actually name and create all 23 of these passenger routes and all 6 of these cargo air routes. And for each one of them, I'm just going to lower the number of vehicles to 1 because I think our airport's going to have more than enough congestion issues as it. I'll be back with you once all these are renamed. Of course, now that we have all these lines drawn in, it's time to unpause the game and watch things get super duper backed up. But after things run for a little bit and we can confirm that planes are in fact flying as they should and taking off and landing in the right locations, then we can delete the temporary stops that are located at the start and ends of the runway, and that should speed up the routes quite a bit. Looks like we've got our first little regional jet flying into the airport. And let's watch it make its approach. Clear and easily clears all of our functionality in there, and it successfully makes its way in, down, and it touches down on the runway eventually, momentarily. You can see my simulation speed is painfully slow for no apparent reason. There we go, it sped back up, simulation speed is back up, it's running, and the plane has slowed down. It's maintaining its speed as it makes its way across. Oh, we got our others. More regional jets are flying their way in, and so are our international planes. Look at them go, landing all nice and smoothly, completely safely. I mean, you know, that's exactly the spacing that you would expect to see between planes, right? Gosh, oh dear. Hey, there's our big old cargo plane too. Look at them, using the taxiways exactly as they should. And while I'm at it, let's just see, does this plane pull into the gate as intended and align as intended? Yeah, good enough, I guess. Fine. How about any of these larger airliners? Do they do it? Oh boy, not so pretty, is it? Oh, Cities Skylines, you never fail to disappoint me. But hey, they are following the taxiways. They're staying within the taxiways, which means we can build our greenery right up to the edges of them. So I'm gonna say that's progress. Pretty cool to finally start to get some life on our airport, even if it's a little bit janky. Pretty awesome. I'm a big fan of this. Now I'm going to try to break the stop hidden inside of these runways. Do we think it'll work? Or is it not going to let me select them? Uh-oh. How do I select it? Oh, there we go. Just have to switch the tier from main assets to sub-elements of sub-building. And bam, stop 1 deleted. Zooming into the runway. Stop 2 deleted. So the planes should just be able to pull through smooth and easily now. Oof, look at those. Plane trying to take off and plane trying to land on top of each other. And if we take a look at our airline routing tool, they are all still routing just fine, except they're no longer stopping to board before taking off. They're just smoothly turning onto the runway, waiting their turn, and then starting to accelerate to go. Great! That should hopefully reduce some of our backup. You love to see it. And I gotta say, it's pretty cool to start to see planes flying all around our region. But now that we have our airport up and running, with apparently no planes on the screen the one time I'm trying to say this, try again. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll actually turn all these buildings on just so that we can tank our budget a little bit more. Check out our monthly cost from negative 2.6 million to suddenly negative 3.7 million per month. This airport is costing us $1 million a month to operate that we certainly do not have. Hey, there's some planes. Now that we have our airport operational and running, it's time for our final segment of this episode and every episode, the outro cinematics. And welcome back! I know these cinematics were not quite as pretty as usual because we've done like no detailing on this project, but we're gonna get to that in the next part, I promise. Despite this airport's slight aesthetic challenges, you can absolutely see the just scale of this project in the cinematics. This is a huge project that's completely shaping our region, and hopefully you can see why it was such a huge priority for me. Our highways, our subway lines, our topography, our coastline, and our height limits all around here are heavily impacted by this project, and I didn't really feel entirely comfortable developing some of these surrounding areas around the airport without really understanding what the constraints for these districts are and how the airport was going to impact them. I'm having a lot of fun just kind of sitting around watching our planes make their way through the runway. I don't know why we're having all these random simulation problems. It's not the airport. It's been like this since well before we finished constructing this airport. But it's a little bit more obvious now as you see the planes kind of stuttering through the sky as opposed to just ground transportation vehicles, which just kind of awkwardly slow down and speed up whenever we have a simulation drop. Pretty cool also to see all this activity running down the highway actually being used, and what's being used kind of most of all is heading into downtown. Seems like a lot of people are not using our express lanes. Nobody is using our express lanes actually, apparently. That's a little sad, isn't it? But people are using the outside highways, so that's pretty cool. Oh, we got a taker. We did get a taker on the express lanes, and someone who's actually going to use the airport road as a bypass. That's pretty neat. Doesn't look like anybody is actually visiting our airport, though. We got 5 whole passengers waiting. Yeah, 5 passengers is totally going to make up for the $1 million a month that we're spending on this airport. Yikes. Well, before I fully end the episode, I have one more thing left to do. In the previous episode, I built out this entire hospital district in Nodo, and it seems like people on YouTube kind of really liked it. That episode was pretty popular, and a lot of people left comments and really helpful feedback about it. The most popular comment was basically that there's too many hospital assets, and I do completely agree. So I've deactivated a lot of these hospitals just to kind of help out with some of our budget woes. I do think it's important to remember though that this hospital district was built to serve the entirety of Veridian County, not just the small area of Lemuria, but the trauma center in this district is going to serve the entire region, the entire state of Washington and the province of BC and maybe even Alaska as well, kind of as an alternative to Seattle if the helicopters want to fly out to Lemuria instead. And the hospitals and ambulances of this facility are going to serve all the way out to the farthest reaches of Veridian County, where we have all of our farmland. So if you think about the scale of this entire county, it starts to make a little bit more sense why there are so many hospitals over here. But yes, I fully agree that this is too many hospitals for now. I'll slowly start to reactivate the hospitals as we get closer to the later in the game and we start to need them more. But if we do end up consistently over capacity, then I may just end up replacing one or multiple of these hospitals with custom assets, or with static ploppables so that we can do a little bit of maybe adaptive reuse and kind of turn them into a office building or maybe even a residential building for something like this. One of the other bits of feedback that I got in the comments of the last episode was actually to pop into this historic mansion and give it a name. And this name was suggested by ShellyU26685. We're going to call it Northern State Hospital. Northern State Hospital is actually a hospital campus here in Washington State, and it was a pretty well-known psychiatric hospital with a lot of ghost stories that are associated with it in the modern day. This building, in our lore from last episode, was basically intended to be the original hospital for the entire city of Lemuria. Just like back in the day when the first settlers were here, this was the hospital that they used. It was probably a really small clinic with maybe like 10 or 12 bedrooms, or maybe something even tighter, because back in the old days, some tighter standards. And now, rather than tearing down that original classical hospital, it's left there, it's preserved in place, but it still was a hospital where people died and people were scared. So there's some ghost stories, just like Northern State Hospital. You can even hear the people yelling as you get in close to it. So I really like the name Northern State Hospital. Thank you to ShellyU26685 for the name suggestion. And thank you to Charles Hale 7574 for just confirming that yes, this haunted house should be the original hospital building that resembles a mansion. Now that we have that building renamed and our airport operational, no detailing yet, that just about does it for me this episode. There's been a lot of work that went into this episode. Getting a custom airport and making it functional like this is just frankly a complete headache in Cities Skylines 2. Unfortunately, the game is really not meant for you to do a custom airport like this quite yet, so I had to do some pretty wild trickery and a lot of experimentation. I'm talking days, weeks, and even months of experimentation just to see if a custom airport would even be possible in the game. But now that I have it working, despite its little bit of flaws every now and again, I am very happy with how it is. I'm very happy with how it's working. I love how we have a little automated people mover, even if it gets quite literally 0 riders consistently. Oh, we actually do have one passenger, Mr. Tom Gardner. Oh, inside he went. He just disappeared because now he's at work. Cool. Anyway, as I was saying, that's going to be it for this episode from me. I want to thank all of you for spending your time watching me today. The last few episodes have been quite long ones, and I really appreciate every single one of you for choosing to spend your time with me. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.